Hello, and thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Michelle Roney, and I am based out of Ann Arbor, working for the Ross Alumni Engagement Office and overseeing our alumni clubs. I'm excited to be working with the Denver Alumni Club tonight to feature our event discussing your career during COVID. So a few housekeeping items before we get started. I know there's some chat questions that have come up on this. So all attendees are muted and their videos are hidden, as this is a webinar setup, but this can be interactive, so please share your thoughts in the chat and ask questions throughout. Our presentation should run about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for more questions that you can ask. So feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A feature throughout the presentation and leave comments in the chat. So first off, before we get started, I'm here to provide you with an update on the state of the school, as a lot has been happening these past few months. I don't plan to take up too much time to ensure that we have ample time for tonight's event. But my update, if you have any questions after, you can reach out to me directly via email, and I'll share that information at the conclusion of tonight's presentation. So first off, students returning to campus. I would like to reiterate the news that students are able to return to campus this fall. The university is offering a public health informed semester for our students in Ann Arbor and around the world. Our faculty and staff have worked throughout the summer to design courses and co-curricular activities that will be transformative and engaging for all students. So classes both in person and online will begin August 31st, just a few weeks, and all classes transitioning to an online format after the Thanksgiving holiday to complete the semester. So the format will consist of both a mixture of in-person and remote classes, structured to reflect our commitment to promoting public health while fulfilling our fundamental mission of transformative education. So most likely the setup will be that large classes are held remote, small classes are held in person, and medium classes will be a hybrid of the two. And more information can be found on the Ross Return to Campus webpage, as well as the university's Campus Maze and Blueprint that I will share in the chat feature later that gives some more details kind of on the university's plan for this fall. And lastly, I'm going to close with Ross's commitment to action. In light of recent events that has been yet many years of systemic racism and violence in our society, we understand the need to come together and identify actions that Ross can take to create real and lasting change. So with that, Ross has crafted the Ross Commitment to Action. And some of these actions were previously implemented, ongoing, and some of these will be implemented in the weeks to come. So to highlight a few, Ross will diversify the Ross School Leadership Team. They will create a DEI curriculum task force. They will expand unconscious bias training, mandatory DEI training for faculty and staff, and they'll expand support for diverse students with outreach programs, increase scholarship support, and more. So these are just a few of the examples outlined in the full action plan. It will evolve over time, align with the overall DEI strategic plan, and serve as a roadmap for our shared accountability. So I'll be sharing a link with that information as well in the chat, so you can read it more in your own time. So with that, thank you for your support of the University and Ross during these unprecedented times. We hope that you enjoy the lineup for this evening. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah to get it started.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and I hope you are excited for our panelists. We had a lot of registrants, people register, and a lot of questions. We've incorporated some of them into the agenda today, and please, as Michelle said, feel free to pop in more questions in the Q&A section, and we'll address some of those at the end of the webinar. We have 1.5 hours set aside for the webinar today, and we'll address as many questions as we can, and anything we don't get to, we will provide responses from the panelists directly to you following the event within a week or so. So we have an audience here today spanning from BBAs, MBAs, and executive MBAs, all the way from graduating classes in 1983 to expecting graduation in 2020. And we also have people from all over the United States, as well as Sweden and Argentina and Italy and Taiwan. So we're super excited today. And also just another note in the chat, you can change the who you send it to so that it's all attendees and panelists. The default is set to panelists. So I guess we'll go ahead and introduce you to our panelists and jump into our questions. So we have with us today Carol Schultz, founder and CEO of Vertical Elevation, executive recruiter, Lisa Morgan from our Ross Alumni Career Coach, and Laura Nelson, VP of Marketing from Signpost. And I'll jump into the questions. So the first question we had today, as I just lost my little thing. Ooh, sorry. Ooh. I'm having a slight technical difficulty here. My little default just went away on me.
That's the world of Zoom. Yeah.
Just as I had it up.
Wouldn't be a webinar if there weren't any issues.
I'm happy to be there while you find it.
Yeah.
Nope, here we go. I'm so sorry about that. So there were obvious winners and losers during COVID, the outbreak of COVID, in terms of industries and companies. There's been obvious winners and losers. What are you seeing in terms of market opportunity, certain sectors such as tech, types of jobs?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that one to start, Leah. From a macro perspective, right, everything that we need to be productive, happy, and well-fed at home is doing great right now. And conversely, anything involved with being in crowds or taking us to those crowds is not doing great. But the good news is I'm seeing alumni getting interviews and job offers still, in quite good numbers. For instance, and I just had a technical glitch in myself, Amazon seems to still be hiring like crazy. The big box stores, home improvement stores are hiring quite a bit. I mean, because of course we can't travel anywhere. So what are we doing? We are staying home and fixing up our houses, right? In addition to that, CPG, food, grocery, online grocery, delivery services, Publix, Walmart, Chewy's, the DoorDashes and Grubhubs of the world. I'm told that aerospace and military are still hiring. In terms of roles, lots of tech-related, digital transformation, data analytics type roles are expanding. I'll let Laura talk about this in a minute. But I think all in all, the roles are across the board. It really just depends on the businesses themselves and how they're doing, because if they're doing well, then they're still hiring across the board. In terms of who's not hiring, commercial real estate, obviously, travel and hospitality have gotten slammed. Higher ed is struggling, of course. Healthcare, because we're not all having those, those optional procedures done. Most consulting firms are being very cautious right now, except for like those IT implementation type companies like McKinsey Implementation, for instance. And then manufacturing and auto too are really being cautious. For a great source on this, you can check out candor.co. If you haven't seen that, their page on hiring and hiring freezes and layoffs. It's really terrific. So what you'll see is crowdsourced information on over 7,000 companies. And if you scroll down, you can even see like an industry compilation. So that's really great to get that overall sketch. But what I think is encouraging is that when we talk to companies who normally come to campus every year to interview our students, what they're telling us is that they are still absolutely planning on holding those interview slots and hiring those students for internships and full-time positions starting next summer. So what that means is that there's really a general sense of optimism for the medium term, which I think is good news. Leah.
Excellent, thank you. So
And I might
nation,
ask whether anybody else wants to add to that. So Carol, did you want to chime in on that as well?
No, I think you covered everything, so I'm good for that.
I can chime in from the hiring perspective. Just so you guys all know, I'm an alum in addition to being a marketing professional now, and I work at a B2B software company. And what I'm noticing is, there's shifts in the market, and Lisa alluded to tech having opportunity. And I've seen that as well, even in my own company. We decided to shift investment and hire more for my team, which was great, and draw down our investment in other places. So, it's happening even on the company level, in addition to what you're seeing on the macro level within the market.
thank you. Thank you both. How has COVID and the shift to remote work impacted hiring? Like, given that, how can candidates effectively position themselves for remote work?
Sure. So, we go back about 10 years plus, there's definitely been a trend toward more people in mid-size metro areas working from home, especially as the technology and collaboration tools have improved and we've all adjusted and adapted to them like we are tonight, right? And I think thanks to COVID-19, this movement obviously has accelerated. In fact, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal that said that over the past 4 months, we've made something like 10 years of progress on the remote work and technology use front, which isn't surprising, right? We're all feeling that, being on the bleeding edge of that. And some tech giants, like Facebook and Twitter, for instance, have announced that they're going to be extending remote work for years for people and even indefinitely. So we obviously see that trend, ticking up, and other companies may follow suit, although certainly like other companies like Google and Apple have announced that they're not planning on going to a fully remote workforce. So that being said, how can candidates position themselves? You can apply for positions regardless of location. And as you're doing that, do the due diligence on the company through networking and research to determine if many people are working remotely. I'm noticing that it does seem like some postings are advertising remote as an option now, or remote at least up to a certain date. In fact, a lot of folks who are getting hired right now are saying that companies are saying to them, hey, don't even plan on showing up to the office until next year. So we're seeing, definitely seeing that happen. And what you can do is pay attention to the cues on this that the company sends during the interview process. If the cues are positive, it's okay to mention that remote would definitely work well for you. If the cues are not particularly positive, I would generally say possibly wait until later in the interview process when you know that they're really sold on you as a candidate to broach the subject of remote work. And if fully remote isn't possible, sometimes partly remote is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I put a point on what you just said, Lisa?
Of course.
To your point about when to broach the subject, to kind of stand on the shoulders of that, it's really important that, your job as a candidate is to sell yourself. That's your only job, right? You're the product. So you're in there, think of it as a high-level sales call. And the objective is to ask smart questions geared around what you can do for them, not what they can do for you. And as Lisa said, once they want to hire you, if they haven't already asked you this question, then they'll be more apt to be flexible around that in the working remote.
Yeah, you have a lot more leverage once they fall in love with you and really see you getting into their organization and doing the jobs that they need done. For me, I'm really excited about this development as someone who really values remote work and having that flexibility, but also as a hiring manager as well. I just hired a director of demand gen for my team, and he's based in Minnesota, and my company is based in Colorado and New York. And that enabled me as a hiring manager to get the best person for the job, regardless of location.
That's great. Lots of opportunities for remote working, right? Considering the various stages of one's career, early, mid, late career, how should someone market or position him or herself at this time? Like, what should be taken into consideration? Carol, would you mind leading on that?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it depends, right? So younger people may tend to be a fit in a hipper company, culturally, startups. Somebody who's maybe 25, 30 years into their career might do better in a larger, more stable company. It really just depends on what someone has been doing throughout their career. I think the most important thing is when one is interviewing to really look at and ask those good questions around, you know, what a general day in your life is going to look like, and you know how various policies are, and really what the cultural fit is, because the unfortunate reality is there's a lot of ageism out there, right? So, you know, it doesn't do any good to complain about it because it's just a reality. So it's incumbent upon the candidate to really get in there and show somebody if the culture is right, if it's the kind of company you want to be in, is going to be the right fit for you, and to make it clear that you'll be a good fit for them. Okay. And I'll let somebody else take it and then come back in.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a great tool to assess, you know, to do some research on the people you'd be working with in your immediate team, your manager, the leadership team, etc. You get a feel for like their seniority, their depth of experience, etc. So definitely do your homework to get a vibe for what that depth may be, right? That's a great resource for it. But also, like, from my personal experience, when we talk about like what should be taken into consideration, I have found that I can be successful not leading with my MBA at different stages of the process. And that's not to say you take it out of your resume, et cetera, but you may not want to make that the focal point, your headline, as you position yourself for various roles, especially when they are roles that don't traditionally hire for MBAs. So that's something to keep in mind.
You know,
Yes.
not just that, Laura, if you're going from a big job in a company and then you want to go into a different company in a lower role, I've seen that happen throughout my entire career. You really have to, I mean, I know if somebody were to reach out to me, they really have to convince me that it's going to make sense for them to do it. Okay. That it's not just, I'm desperate for a job, and when the economy gets better, I'm going to turn around and leave. You know, that is then incumbent upon the people who are interviewing you to make sure that they qualify you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I've looked up hiring managers in my own experience, and if I see that I have a lot more experience than them, it's not a good opportunity for me. It's probably not a great fit for them either.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, really interesting points. I mean, one thing that I would add to this for everybody who's job seeking right now is that for those folks who have lost a job during COVID-19, as far as employers go, everyone more or less has a pass. So there's no harm, no foul in having lost a job during COVID. You know, everybody's going to know somebody who's gone through it. It's still very important to couch that positively. And I'm happy to work with you on that if that's your situation, but it shouldn't be a big worry of yours. Another thing to think about during recessions, especially, is, you know, regardless of whether you found something part-time or you found a consulting gig or even volunteer work, it all counts as relevant experience in terms of your resume, and it can be a valuable part of your story. So for some folks, it's going to be good to be thinking outside the box right now.
So kind of in that vein, we had a question from the audience. How should a job seeker who's been with one company for 20 plus years search for a new job or a new career at this stage?
This is really an important question in a situation that's really challenging. And there may be some people out in the audience who are not going to like my answer to this question, but over and over and over, and I am making a generalization here, but this is by far very well north of 50% of people who have been in a job for 20 years or longer have a tremendous amount of difficulty changing jobs. And often it can take them 2 or 3 jobs to settle in. And there are a lot of reasons for that. You've been in a company so long and learned how they do things. And a different company is going to do things differently. That will be a challenge in one's transition. You may not have the first clue about how to even go about finding a new job. I hear this from people all the time. My career coaching clients all the time. I've never had to look for a job before. Somebody's always called me. So that's another piece, is how to find the job. How to, again, going back to our other question that we just answered, how to ask the right questions to learn, is this a company I want to work for, without those questions occurring as, why should I come to work for you? Because it can never come across that way. And there are a lot of steps to go through in finding the right job. And the first step anyone needs to look at, regardless of whether they've been with the company for 20 years or 2 years, really is to take an in-depth look at your history and figure out what the common denominators are in your career. Those that have propelled your progress and your success, and those that have limited it. Okay.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's great advice.
What tips do you have for finding executive level roles? Also for public board seats or board advisory roles?
Yeah. So it partly depends on the size of the company and what you consider to be an executive level role, right? So, a vice president of sales at a Series A startup is a first line sales manager. Granted, they have to build a company, but that's different than the vice president of worldwide sales at Oracle, who has 4 levels of management below him, or maybe 5. I'd have to count that up. I think actually 5. And so again, it depends on what you consider to be an executive role. What have you done in the past? Is it the money that makes you consider that's an executive role? Is it the level of responsibility? Is it the number of reports that you have? Is it how many layers of management above and below you that makes it an executive level? So, a general rule of thumb would be to target search firms, if you're going to look that way, who are actually doing the work that you're looking for. Okay, determine a target list of companies. That's always my advice to people. Go in, look at the companies that are doing things that you've done similarly before. It's the same type of sale, it's the same level of sale, average deal sizes, those types of things. B2B, B2C, whatever that might be. Okay, reach out directly to whomever would likely be the person that you would be reporting to. So if it's a CEO job, you might reach out to people who are on the board. And of course, through networking. Networking is always incredibly valuable. And that's, of course, where your LinkedIn network will be of value, right? So, you can either send messages to your direct connections via LinkedIn, or ideally send those messages directly to their email box, their business email. It shows you've really put in the effort to track somebody down. And it would be the same for a board seat, that same process.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about my own experience, because I was at director level for 10 years and I just moved up to the executive team at a new company in the last 7 months. And how I found that role was through networking. I got really lucky here and wasn't exactly looking to make this change, but I happened to be the right person with the right experience at the right time. But if I were proactively looking for it, which was going to be my next move at some point anyways, I would really rely upon my network and look for the type of company that is going to take on someone that is, you know, a rising star or like a stretch candidate in that role. That's easier for me if being in the tech world and working at smaller companies that are looking for builders. So I have a track record of that personally. But I think that really just underscores what Carol was talking about, you know, building on your experience, having a track record, determining what type of company that will be and whether that makes sense for your next step, given where you've been. I'll say it's very similar for board seats as well. I was on a nonprofit board last year, and how I got on that in that particular position was through volunteering with that organization first. So I highly recommend this, especially if you're looking at the nonprofit route and board seats and leadership within those organizations. It's, you know, being involved with that organization, you know, at the grassroots level, showing that you're passionate about the cause, and, you know, taking that opportunity to do more when the opportunity presents itself.
And just the last point on that, you just got me thinking about that, Laura, is that they have to see the value of you when, if it's a board seat or an advisory position, right? Because I have these conversations with founders all the time about, you know, who's on your board. Is it people that are going to literally add value to what it is that you're selling? Okay, same thing as an advisor. You know, I've been looking at a couple of startups in my sector to potentially sit on their advisory boards, and it's incredibly challenging. So they have to see, and they have to get to the point where the problem you're going to solve, whether you're on the board or in an advisory role, is painful enough that they're like, okay, I've got to have you here to help us with this.
So I think if I could add to this, what I would say is this is definitely an argument in favor of keeping up your network and having a really good reputation, because, you know, especially in those executive roles, unless they're using a recruiter, and sometimes even when they are using recruiter, they are asking the executives in the network, you know, whom they might know. So, you know, keep in touch with those former colleagues, have a great reputation, and by all means have a very robust LinkedIn profile, because companies and recruiters are spending their days, or their staffs are spending their days searching LinkedIn for good candidates. So make sure that you've got, you know, your positions captured well, you're using those keywords appropriately, but repetitively where possible, so that you show up high in a Google search.
Thank you. Great answers. Kind of switching gears a little bit. How does a job seeker evaluate and work with a recruiter? You know, there are different types of recruiters. What's important to know? Can you talk about agency versus corporate versus contingent versus retained, executive recruiting, and mid-level? Carol, would you like to respond to that for us?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that question. We could probably spend the whole hour and a half just talking about that. But I would say the most important thing for anybody to know is that recruiters are paid by and work for the client, not the candidate. Okay, so I hate to say this, it's just the unfortunate nature of the industry that I'm in, that I've been in for almost 30 years. And don't be upset if you send a resume and you never hear back. Don't be upset if the recruiter gives you a little bit of time and then they don't follow up. That also will tell you the quality of the recruiter you're now working with, by the way, right? So you've got, and Leah started to mention this. So there's things that you need to know, right? So the types of recruiters, there's really three types of recruiters: agency, staffing, and corporate. Okay, corporate recruiters work for the company. Staffing, for any of you who don't know what that is, it's generally you work for the staffing company and they send you out to do the work. Okay, so they're placing you. They're also recruiters, but it's done differently. You're not on the company's payroll, although you may be working at their location every day. And then on the agency side, there's two types of recruiters. There are contingent and retained. about 80% of agency recruiters are contingent, meaning they don't get paid unless they close a deal. There are a lot of problems with that, okay? Because there's a lot of, if you start to look at the challenges around that, companies will say, oh, we're using 5 contingent recruiters. Well, all that does is you've got no loyalty to the company. There's no real partnership with the agency. And if you're lucky, maybe 2%, I ask this question a lot. I hear usually between 2% and 5% of contingent recruiters are really any good. Doesn't mean there aren't others making deals and making money, but if you want an experience with a quality person, how do you go about then finding that 2 to 5%? The other 20% are retained recruiters, and those numbers are higher than 2 to 5%, but they're not, I mean, I've had people complain to me about, I'll never work with this company again. I'll never work with that company again. So that's unfortunately a nature of recruiters. So you've got what I refer to as agents of management and consultants to management. So when I say agents of management, I'm looking at the contingency and the corporate, typically, right? They just say, here's a job spec, go fill it, right? So the agent of management is really more like an order taker, not a true partnership with the person who's doing the hiring, the stakeholder, as opposed to a consultant to management who is in there in the trenches in a partnership being paid by the company. I write all my position descriptions for my clients. We go back and forth till they sign off on it. Usually takes 2 or 3 tries, 2 or 3 drafts to do that before I'm prepared to present it to anybody. Okay. And it makes the company look super professional when you do that. Okay. When somebody sends you a job spec that is 1 paragraph and then a litany of bullet points, how much effort really went into figuring that out. And then the best recruiters also are going to take time to really get to know you. So if a recruiter gives you 15 minutes, that tells you something. Okay. If somebody really takes the time to get to know you, and I'm not suggesting everybody needs to spend the kind of time I do. It all depends on the level of the search you're doing, the kind of the company. I can say that I spend 3 to 4 hours with a candidate before determining, is this somebody I want to move forward with? And then I have to write a submission, you know, and that's another, I don't know, 2, 3 hours, depending on how many times I have to go back to it and edit it. So it's very, very labor intensive. You know, it's unfortunate that sometimes you have to say to a recruiter, and I would say to a contingent recruiter, I just want to be clear, you're not going to send my resume out without my permission, right? And it's super important to say that to them. I would not ever recommend posting your resume online on a job board, because you're going to get spammed like perpetually. Like you'll probably have to change your email address. Okay. So, I mean, that's at a high level. Let's see what Lisa and Laura may have to say, and if there's anything else I can throw in, because I know we set aside a little extra time for this question.
Sure, that was a great background, Carol. Thanks so much. The other thing I would say is, any one, let's say retained recruiter, let's say, obviously, you want to aim for working with retained recruiters if possible. But any one recruiter, because they're making something like 30% of the starting salary of the candidate, when you do the math on that, they only, and the amount of work that goes into that process, they're only staffing like a handful, they're only doing a handful of searches a year. You're nodding your head, Carol. So I've got that right. Yeah. So based on that, the odds that any one recruiter is going to have the right position for you at the moment that you are looking is like the odds of you getting struck by lightning.
Right.
So you just have to know that about recruiters. So one bit of wisdom would be try to build relationships over time with recruiters, with a lot of retained recruiters if possible. And those relationships likely are going to be built through referral. So if you have a colleague who has worked successfully through a recruiter, often those are the best referrals, and they will usually be willing to talk to you. And consider recruiters like your network. They're just other networking contacts that you have. They may not be doing a search that's right for you, but they're plugged into what's happening, and they may hear of something that they're willing to pass along, even though it doesn't really earn them any money per se. So yeah, those are some other things I would add to it.
Yeah. You know, and it depends on the level of the position, right? So, you know, I've always been I mean, the people who hire me, I've done things all over the map, especially for startups. I'll sometimes do things for startups I wouldn't even consider doing for another company, right? And, you know, to your point, Lisa, if somebody makes a referral, you know, says, this is a really great friend of mine, would you be willing to have a conversation with them? And I'm looking at the background going, well, there's no way in hell I'm gonna be able to do anything with this person, but I will always make the time to do it because I think that it's you know, it's just good karma to do things like that. You know, you gotta, listen, I've been successful. I've been fortunate in my career. I think it's really important for me to give back somehow. I mean, I'm sure everybody here feels the same way.
So just as an FYI, we have a couple of links that we're putting in the chat on this subject. So this is based on a Forbes article on some of the big retained search firms, as well as kind of, you know, professional recruiting firms. Just as an FYI, you can check that out. And also, Carol is obviously a recruiter, and we're going to share all of our contact information at the end in case you want to follow up with questions for her or for any of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll tie on with my practical and recent experience with a recruiter. I was lucky to work with the retained recruiter on the position that I mentioned earlier, the hire from Minnesota. And what's interesting is, yeah, you know, I wasn't really familiar with the terminology until Kara was explaining it. And it was exactly the type of partnership that you would want. It was consultative. We had multiple iterations of the job description. They went deep in understanding who and what I needed, what capabilities, you know, culturally what I was looking for. They had a good sense of the organization because they've worked with us before. And they weren't, you know, they weren't pushing bad candidates on me just to get paid, because they were taken care of and we had, you know, compensated them for their time. And I actually ended up hiring someone who didn't come through their process, but you know, we worked so well with them that we have retained them for our next position. So I think that's a really important distinction when you're on the hiring side, and to know about when you're a candidate. And, you know, on the candidate side, I would always recommend exactly what Carol and what Lisa were saying, you know, make them part of your network, build relationships, don't expect something to happen overnight, and, you know, leverage them as partners, but know that you are in control of your own destiny and have to be your best advocate in this process as well.
That's great, thank you. I'm gonna redirect a question to you, Laura. Laura was a job seeker during the 2008-2009 recession. And Laura, what was the hardest part about your career search during the 2008-2009 recession?
Yeah, I've experienced this a couple times because I actually finished undergrad in 2002. So we had some turbulence after 9/11, and then of course the recession in 2008. And as an MBA candidate coming from a non-traditional background, I already knew that I was going to be doing my own self-directed search, as we call it, my own legwork. And my, you know, my biggest challenge was just staying on task and making it my my job without a job, right? And I know a lot of people, you know, structure their day like that already, but it's, you know, it's really important to have discipline and to treat it like an occupation. That's one thing. I think the most valuable aspect of all of it was to really lean in on the network. This is what we all bought into when we decided to come to the University of Michigan. We got into the Ross School, when we dedicated a couple years to making, you know, friends and acquaintances for life. It's not just a 2-year relationship. This is something that continues throughout your professional career, and it is the most valuable part of the experience. And that you have to remember to like tap into again. You know, we have a culture that is really willing to help one another out. And that I have found most rewarding above everything, right? Like there are simple concepts in classes that I don't remember or aren't as applicable today as they were when I was in school, but the you know, the people that comprise the program are really who are going to help you and help navigate you to the right people and places where you want to be for your next step. And then finally, I know there's a, you know, there's a bit of a, you know, identity crisis, right? When you're not working the full-time job that you want. And you really got to remember that your job is not your identity. It doesn't, it's only part of who you are, but it's not everything. So you got to keep that in mind and keep things in perspective and, you know, allow yourself to indulge in your hobbies and to have a life outside of the job search and, you know, keep an even keel about the whole process.
Good advice.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add on to that, I totally agree. I think that there's, you know, having structure, having discipline, but paying attention to like the physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual dimensions, and making sure that you have balance, because really there are only so many hours you can devote to job search a day. And so, you know, it's good to step away from it too, and just, you know, approach it with some discipline, but also with some, you know, being sort of gentle with yourself and taking care of all the dimensions of life. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting right now with COVID is that it's in some ways it's almost easier to network right now because people are stuck at home. So as long as you're keeping the ask, you know, short, right, brief, I think in some ways it's easier. The other thing is that in a way there's less pressure now because since many companies aren't hiring, you know, you can right away start off your networking conversation with, hey, listen, I know your company's probably not hiring right now. I'm really just in the, you know, information gathering phase. And I'd love to just chat about your experience. So just make it a really easy ask. And what that does is plant seeds for the future so that, you know, you build that relationship over time. And then when things do open back up, then people remember you and they want to help you.
You know, I think what's important to remember on this is that you need to always be networking. Don't wait. You know, we live in a world that's mostly reactive, and reactive isn't effective. You need to be proactive. So when you don't need a job, when you're not looking for a job, when you're not open to hearing, it's still really important to network and to talk to people, because that will help you when the next crash comes along, which may be in another 10 years.
Let's hope it takes that long.
Yeah. I mean,
Time will tell, right?
Yep.
Are there any, we addressed some of this already, I think, but are there any additional like networking approaches or strategies that work best during like the last recession? And what advice would you have for someone pursuing a career change right now for like networking approach or strategies for pursuing that?
I want to make one thing clear in that, like, there's not much different from the last recession, other than like certain industries and companies may be losing this time versus they were less affected last time. Like there's more commonalities between the times, right? This is a market change regardless of the cause. And there's, you know, there's opportunities in new places and there's a lack of opportunities in other places. So it's acknowledging that it's, you know, there's movement in the market and you have to be nimble as a candidate to position yourself effectively for those companies who are hiring and who need someone with your skills and with your experience. Lisa touched on this well, on networking and making the ask. If you're going to, really critical to network. You know, I highly recommend your Ross Club, you know, in your town or in your metro area. Those people are probably closest to the jobs you want if you're looking for a company that is somewhat local. If not, if you're looking somewhere remote, like LinkedIn is your friend in either scenario. But you have to be really specific about the ask. right? You want to, instead of just saying like, hey, can I have some of your time? Hey, can I have 15 minutes to talk to you about your experience transitioning from an analyst to a manager, or whatever the case may be. That way you've imprinted, how much time you're asking for, what type of conversation you're hoping to have, and what you're trying to learn from it, as opposed to something open-ended, which may be perceived as a larger ask. More often than not, people will give you more time than you asked for. So I think that's a really important piece of advice there.
Absolutely true. I guess the other thing is just remember that we have that phenomenal Ross alumni page on LinkedIn, where you can do, really great research, sort of narrowing down the list of alumni to exactly who you might be interested in talking to, whether that's by company they work for, by what they studied, by what industry they're in, and so forth. So highly recommend that page, and then using both the alumni directory as well as LinkedIn to actually reach out to folks, right? Trying to get that email address if possible.
That's great. Go ahead.
No. And don't just spam people on LinkedIn. I'm sure we're all used to getting those messages, right? Where people just ask to connect with you. You have to be really specific and really targeted, as Laura said. That's just super, super important. And not everybody will respond to you, and that's okay. That's right. But yeah.
That's great. And in vein with what Lisa just told us about Michigan Ross's alumni resources, like what resources are available for Ross alums at various stages in their career and job search?
Sure. So Ross alumni have access to lifetime career coaching, which is pretty unique among schools and MBA programs. And I like to describe this as everything from soup to nuts, right? It's everything from who am I, what do I want to be when I grow up, to, and that's regardless of what your age or stage is of career, to how do I articulate my brand on my resume, on LinkedIn, and in my elevator story, to then even prepping for interviews and really negotiating your best deal. If you Google Ross Alumni Career Services, you'll see that we have something called the Career Step by Step, which is a self-guided career process, which includes assessments that you can take. We also have a link to our job postings database, which is now called Ross Recruit, along with a whole host of recorded webinars like this one that are out there. So you can reach out to me directly to schedule an appointment. You can do that either through our website, or you can reach me via email, and we'll be posting those email addresses at the end, like I said. And Laura, I don't know if you want to add anything to that with your experience actually as a job seeker using career services as an alum.
We had a group following for the 2008 and 2009 batches that met weekly, that shared best practices. It was facilitated by the school, but certainly if that's not happening now, I imagine it may be, it's always good to, form a cohort with people in the same boat. Constantly just put out there what you're looking for, what you're hearing. It gets in people's heads, and then obviously you can provide, moral support for one another as well, and share your victories too. LinkedIn was huge for me when I was looking at certain companies, certain roles, seeing where Michigan people were. I can't emphasize that enough, really.
Yeah, terrific. And we do have a job action group going right now, actually, with new alumni. So love that, and love bringing those success stories for people who are landing back to the group, and where we all can kind of celebrate those victories.
That's great.
I'm sorry, one other thing. We're going to post a link to the Alumni Career Services page in the chat. So check that out. I know Leo's going to put that out there for us.
Yep, I think I already did. So
okay, excellent.
That's great. And also, there was just to remind everyone too, that the recording of this webinar, along with other webinars that Ross hosts, will also be made available to everyone. It might take about a week or so for that to happen. So we have some time left for additional questions. We've got some that have already come in, and we're welcome to take some more too. One is, I think we had one just kind of pop up from about PE. Carol, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so Catherine asked, what about PE? And I'm not exactly sure, she, oh, here we go. How to network, how it's different. Yeah, there's been no mention of it. Okay, so private equity is not that dissimilar from venture capital. I know a lot of venture capitalists who do VC, and they also do PE in-house. So it's just, it's not, they're not really like rowing in two different boats necessarily. Often private equity goes into a company with the absolute purpose of getting out of it. Now, venture capitalists also have, they're looking for the big giant return, which only happens in about 10%, right? Not everybody is Facebook or LinkedIn or, Apple or any of these companies or Amazon that have been massive, unicorns, right? And so you would, in my own networking, I just do the same thing really with venture capitalists and private equity. They have to understand that they have a need for you, if they have a need for you at all. And you would really follow the same process, network around with people. I earlier this year decided to write an ebook on the 5 things that insurtechs need to be successful. And most of those things are applicable, except for the insurtech specific pieces, are applicable in any startup. And I sent out a number of LinkedIn connections. I think like 70% of people accepted them. And then I followed up with many of those people and requested that they have either a conversation or send me an email on some things like that. And I built amazing relationships just doing that with people, right? Because I wasn't getting in contact with them to try to sell them something. And sometimes that is really the best way to do it. Because everything, oh God, they're trying to sell me something. I don't need that right now. So it's sort of the backdoor, softer approach, and it's really, really effective.
Yeah, and I have some classmates, I can think even from my own class, and I was in the Bay Area for years, who have PE or VC careers, and there's no one path into this career, right? So what I would recommend is, find these guys and gals on LinkedIn, ask them for 15 minutes to tell you how they navigated this search. What opportunities did they see and seize along the way to land that role? Because I know like 1 or 2 of them went straight to VC, and others found their way into it after operating departments, divisions, and executive level roles at other companies.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is, again, it's like networking. And, once you get into that network and they know who you are, and you're successful as an executive in one of their companies, and there's a successful exit, generally speaking, they're going to remember you the next time around. So it seems like it's getting in to begin with. That's the challenge with private equity, for instance. And so, yeah, starting with networking, starting with that outreach, and obviously always having the good LinkedIn profile, once again, that really showcases you as an executive and shows your wins, is really important too.
And have it professionally written if you need to. Unless you're a professional writer, have it written for you. It'll be a good spend of your money.
We have another question from the audience. Any suggestions from Rob, any suggestions for Americans looking to find overseas opportunities?
Yeah, so I would say use one. There are websites that can help you with that. So we have some resources on our Ross website. So Rob, if you want to reach out to me after the fact, we can discuss that. There's also Going Global, which is a database that you have access to as a Ross alum, which will help you with finding out about overseas opportunities.
Yeah, that's great, Lisa. I think also look at companies that are just starting to expand globally or are already global, right? I mean, the sort of easiest example of that is the big consulting firms, right? McKinsey, Bain, and BCG. These are global companies. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to in other countries that have moved here and people from here that they move people all over the world. So that really works beautifully. But again, any kind of a company who is in a global position, I mean, that's really, the path of least resistance.
Yeah, my path was probably a little different. I worked overseas, but working for the government. So I don't know that everyone wants to do that, but it's an option.
Depends on the role.
Yeah.
Any additional tips for success for how candidates can effectively network with COVID-19, like particular tips with LinkedIn or anything like that? I know we've addressed some of it already.
Yeah, we did. And like I said, you need to connect with the right people, right? The right people, whoever those people are for you. So you can either send out, you've only got 240 characters in a LinkedIn connection request. So if you're going to do that route, think very, very carefully about what you want to say. Okay. If you're connecting with the first time for somebody. And it may behoove you just to pay for a LinkedIn upgrade. I think for candidates, depending on whether you pay monthly or annually, it's somewhere between $30 and $50 a month. So pay for the upgrade, send somebody messages directly. As Laura has said, make the ask that you want to ask to, get some time with somebody. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. If I remember, I'll come back to it.
I would put it out there too. You keep that top of mind as you're interacting with people, most likely virtually these days, but catching up with old friends, making new acquaintances, etc. The more you put that ask out there, the more kind of feedback you'll get, right? You never know where that connection may come from unless you plant the seed in their minds.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add to that is, and I think Carol mentioned this earlier, I'm also a big fan of having a target company list. So it's so important once you know or have a notion of your goal, your sort of position objective, the next step is absolutely to develop and collect a list of targets. Steve Dalton, who wrote the book 2 Hour Job Search, recommends a list of 40, like really a list of 40. And then, potentially as you go through the early stage networking process, you can put that list in front of people and say, hey, what do you think of, these are companies that are on my list of potentials. Who else would you be adding to this list if you were me, given what my target is? So, when you put something in front of people and they can see it, it starts to spark their mental Rolodex, and they'll start coming up with names and people who they can potentially refer you to, as well as other companies they might suggest you add to the list.
And I think I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to put another point on this. Sending people emails directly to their business is going to get to them a lot quicker than it is through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is so great, but it's also there's just so much noise on LinkedIn nowadays. So how do you get somebody's attention that they're even going to look at the email and respond to you, right? So, and there's just tons of tools out there to get people's email addresses and phone numbers. If you're going to send somebody an email, write a template and then adjust it for each person you send it to. If you're going to leave a voicemail for somebody, write a script. I know that may sound cheesy, but it is the absolute best way not to trip over your words. Read it out loud, make sure, and then adjust it to the person you're leaving the message for. Somewhere, 30 to 30 seconds to maybe up to a minute, depending. Okay. And there's a million tools out there that you can get accurate phone numbers and emails. I would say, for me, I bet with I subscribe to 2 or 3 different things for that. And I bet 80% or higher, probably 80% correct phone numbers. And then it's certainly well north of that for emails.
So another question from the audience: in a hyper-competitive job market like this one, what should be a job seeker's strategy between waiting for the right position versus being willing to make compromises in the search more than they typically would?
What a great question. That is the sort of the fundamental question during this market is, how much do you settle and how much do you wait? I think one of my questions is, do you have a job right now? That would be one of my questions. Mm-hmm. And what's your situation, right? What's your appetite for risk? And really what, are there elements of the job that's in front of you that is maybe not your ideal that could lead you or position you, even better toward that ideal in the future?
Yeah. Building on that, this is probably not the last job that you'll ever have, this next step. So is it a bridge to what that ideal goal is beyond that is a really important question to ask. And, there may be financial considerations as well that will pull you one way or the other.
Right. I mean, people that need a job will compromise. The problem with that is often that compromise leads to a short job tenure. And then if you have another one that's another short job tenure, then you start having people look at you going, why couldn't you hold a job? Did you take a job because you were desperate? I mean, you're really climbing uphill under those circumstances. But the reality is, if you need something, you need something, right? So all you can do is do your best to find the thing that matches 9 of your 10 items or even 8 of your 10 items, because as Lisa said, you never know where that might then grow, especially if it's with the right kind of growing company that you're a good cultural fit to.
Yeah, and you're always trading off like the gap, right? The gap on your resume. I mean, ideally, if you can not go a year without a job, that's ideal. I mean, it gets hard. It gets hard after a year, I would say.
Yeah, very good.
Another question. My son is starting, and I apologize if I butcher your name, Abhilsa, I think. My son is starting a BBA at Ross next month. Any suggestions for him that you can share?
Oh, I would love to answer this question. So I would say absolutely your son should take advantage of all career services. Don't put it off. Do all the things, pay attention to the emails and the messages that are coming from the CDO office, which is the Career Development Office, and attend their sessions, do everything they tell you to do. And don't put it off till senior year. You want to really jump on that, get an internship, and, take advantage of everything, and he'll be in good shape.
And another question for Lisa, if there are any other books that you recommend?
Any other books I recommend for your son?
Nope, this is a separate question, just books in general. I think you mentioned one in a response earlier.
Oh yeah, the 2-Hour Job Search. Yeah, that's a great book. I have that recording too. We had the workshop. We had the author here back in January, and we recorded the session. And so I can send a link to that for folks who are interested. You can reach out to me after the fact. Great session. And gosh, what other books do I recommend? Those are the biggies. I mean, I just did a session on designing your life, which is pretty fun. So I do like that one as well.
Great. And I think we had another question that Carol already answered in the chat here. Specifically, what is the best tool for getting someone's work email? What do you recommend or use?
Well, I use Lucia. There's a plugin to LinkedIn, LUSHA. I use Seamless AI. It's very, very cool. I love how Seamless integrates into LinkedIn. It integrates in a totally different way that Lucia does. Zoom Info is super, super expensive though. So I just happen to be fortunate that I'm with the 9th largest search firm in North America. So we have buying power. So, but Zoom Info is really, really fantastic. So I recommend you can start with one, maybe Lucia or Seamless, but you often need two, because I've noticed that they don't always have the same information. So, and those are just a few, but there's millions of them out there. These just happen to be my favorite.
That's great. Thank you. Kind of jumping around a little bit, but another question is how to keep perseverance strong during this challenging time, like anything that you do while you're looking for a new role, kind of side gigs, anything like that, skill building, tools for resilience. Anybody have anything to add on that?
Sure. I spoke a little earlier about keeping a routine, but also not ignoring other interests and hobbies you have. I'm really into fitness and the outdoors, and that was important for me to keep up anytime I was searching for a job, just because it gave me joy and was something to look forward to every day. So definitely keep those habits going strong. And I think it is a really unique opportunity to level up your skills, depending on what industry or what function you're in. Take some online courses, learn a little more about a specialty that could give you a certificate or knowledge or a leg up that you could actually speak to as part of the process, or like add as a bullet point on your resume. And it shows a lot of initiative and motivation to learn new skills, to bridge any gaps you may have in your knowledge as well.
Yeah, and I think, adding to that, I think just, taking care of yourself, like I said earlier, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual domain. One of my, the job seekers I'm working with right now, an alum, is doing volunteer work. So, and he's figured out a way to do this in a socially distant manner, but I think it's really keeping him going. It's giving him purpose, and it's helping him feel like, he's making a difference somewhere.
Yeah. I think one's mindset is just super, super important, as both of you are pointing out. I mean, everybody's been going through this. I know, I've been working from home since 2002, so a long time. So my life didn't really change a lot, but I rely on my social life, which came to a screeching halt for over 2 months. So, I mean, I feel for me, I just kept thinking, okay, what's the silver lining? What's the silver lining? What's the silver lining? And for me, it was mostly, I'm grateful I have horses and, a very large ranch, and, to ride them on and off them and do all this stuff. So for me, that was really my silver linings, that I could still get out and be out in the beautiful, countryside of Colorado and, in the forest or whatever I wanted to do without having to worry about, all the drama that was going on in the country, which is still going on, frankly.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your questions thus far, and panelists for your great tips. We've got some links and responses to questions in both the Q&A and in the chat. The recordings will be made available to you, and if there were additional questions that we didn't get to, we'll be reaching out to you guys from the panelists with some responses. And I'm just gonna pass it over to Michelle again to wrap up from her end.
Hi, yes, thank you everyone for joining tonight. We know we didn't get to everyone's questions, so feel free to reach out individually to any of the panelists at their direct email, or even myself if you have any questions on the updates that I shared at the beginning of the session. We also would love to hear your feedback on this event, so feel free to take the survey. You can use your cell phone and utilize the QR code, or you can use this link directly to take the survey. So again, thank you so much everyone for joining tonight, and all your amazing questions and making this a truly interactive session. The Denver Club is so grateful for your participation during this virtual time. So we hope to see you again at a future virtual event, and hopefully in the future in person once again. So thank you, and with that, have a great night and go blue.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.